Hey everybody, how's it going? My name is Corey Wakefield, and I'm one of the developers here at themeco. Well, the day has finally arrived. We are so happy to finally have X Pro out in the wild and in everyone's hands, and it's very cool to start getting the feedback we're getting and seeing the things you all are creating with this new suite of features. So keep it coming, and we want to hear more from you guys. And one of those things that we've heard from you all is just that you would like to see a little more video, maybe walking through different aspects of the tool, how certain things work. I mean, because as you guys have figured out already, if you've dug into the X Pro ecosystem, there's a lot to work with now. There's a lot more available at your fingertips than there was before, which means a lot more possibilities. It just means a lot more to dig into as well. So I want to take a little bit of time today to just do a kind of general overview of the tools. We're going to do some more videos later where we go more in depth on certain features, such as, setting up sticky bars, like even this sticky template here. There's a lot going on with, this first bar that's shrinking and then the second bar that gets revealed as you scroll down. Lots of cool stuff. Or like the content scrolling feature. I don't know if you guys have messed with that a lot lately, but we're seeing a lot of sites like Google and Medium and different web presences just using different mobile and responsive techniques, and we've baked a lot in here for you guys to play around with and use. And so today we're just going to kind of dig in and walk through and explain a few things and have a little fun. So let's do that. I'm going to log in here real fast. And don't worry, guys, I'm on a local install. I know a few of you are going to write in saying, oh, your username's admin. It's not very secure. Don't worry, we got this covered. So I will launch the header builder here. If you guys are kind of unfamiliar with X Pro, this is really the beginning of a new suite of tools we're offering to kind of our tier of users. We did a survey a while back where we found that roughly half and half of our users are kind of split between wanting something that's a little more plug and play, and then some people that want, they want the plug and play, but they also want to be able to really dig in and tweak things and get it, just right. Maybe if you're working for an agency or you have a design company. So X Pro features are new header and footer builders, along with a lot of other improvements in different areas. But eventually, it will kind of bleed out into all other areas of the theme. In terms of providing a lot of granular control over what you can build. And the headers and footers are kind of the start of that, kind of the bookends to your website. So we will hop in here. If you guys have already been playing around with the tool, you will be familiar with this screen. This is the header index screen. So when you're making your new header for the first time, you'll start right here. And we do have a few templates that you guys can choose from if you want to start. So for example, we have a default header here, just some simple drop downs. We've got some different hero configurations. So maybe you would like a big, call to action when people first hit your website. But you need some navigation going on and a few other things. Or maybe you are open to trying something a little more experimental, a little more clean and minimal. It's still plenty to play around with. You can also do a standard side layout with lots of cool features like our collapsing nav and our search animations. We're going to get into these a little bit today, these particles. I know a lot of people have been asking about that, and we'll be doing a more detailed video on that. But for today, let's start with a blank slate. So we are going to make, I already have a playground. We'll do playground 2. We'll create that. And before we even dig into building, I've got a blank screen up here because I have nothing there yet. We will talk about assignments. So the really cool thing about the header and footer builders is now you all have the ability to assign different headers to different spots of your website. So for example, we get people all the time that are curious. They want to, maybe have a standard global navigation everywhere on their site, but then on the front page only, maybe they want that big hero header kind of look. Well, you can do that now. You can easily make 2 different headers, assign them in the appropriate spots, and you're good to go right there. You can also have, let's say you want a certain header for your shop. You want to create a different look for that section of your site. Or maybe you want a different header for your blog. Maybe you want a totally unique look for the blog section of your site, where it's a little more insulated from the rest of your content. So it feels kind of off-site, but it's still connected to your backend, and you can maintain it all from one space. But these are all possible now with the header builder and the assignments. And you can assign as little as to one page or to one product, or you can assign to everything on your site. So we're actually just going to play with this header here. We're going to make it our global header. Just a little notice saying, hey, you are putting this everywhere. And then we will jump in here. So the first thing you'll see when you jump in is the region selector here. So this is where you will determine where you want to place your bars. For the most part, probably 90% of the time, 95% of the time, people generally find they're creating, headers with kind of a bar at the top. That's a very standard look. However, if you do find that you want something a little different, or you're just trying to achieve a different look, we have our left and right regions. So here's a left bar, and I'm going to scroll here a little bit. The thing to keep in mind about the sidebars, just like in X, is your sidebars are always fixed. They're always with you, but there's a lot of cool improvements to them. Everything in the header and footer builders is powered by Flexbox. So there's a lot of really neat layout possibilities in terms of vertically centering a lot easier, spacing things out, getting equal height columns. Really cool stuff that we'll go into in a little more detail later. But for now, we're just kind of breezing through. Same thing with the right bar. Fixed to the side. And then the bottom bars, we only support one bar here, but this is great for, again, this is always fixed as well at the bottom of your screen. But this is really cool if you, maybe on a mobile navigation, wanted to set a really tiny, let's actually dig in right now and see some possibilities here. So we'll make that container full width, make the menu. All right, so we got our menu there. Actually, let me take no drop downs, top links, graphic. Yes, we do want a graphic. Let's say we don't want, let's play with no text. So if you wanted to, now again, I haven't styled this or anything. I've just very quickly thrown this together. But if you wanted a really cool kind of mobile navigation at the bottom of your screen, maybe on a smaller device as you scroll down, lots of really cool possibilities with that and what you can achieve. So anyway, those are the regions of where you can add bars. But for the most part, like we said, you are typically building up here in this kind of what we call the top region. And there's really no limit to how many bars you can put up here. So let's just add one for right now. And before we add any content, well, actually, let's just add a button so we can kind of see what's going on here a little bit. And maybe I'll add a logo just to give it a bit of a look. There we go. Got a little logo, got a button. Let me start with the bar here. So bars, if you're familiar with Cornerstone, are kind of the equivalent of, they're not really the sections, they're kind of like the rows of Cornerstone, where you would put a column within a row in Cornerstone and you kind of divvy up your content in there. Think of the bar as that. You can put as many of these containers as you want in each bar, and each container can house as many elements as you need. And it's really just, up to you and the look you're trying to achieve and whatever you're wanting to do, how you want to set that up. So right here we have one bar with one container. That container is spread full width. This is the kind of cool thing with the Flexbox stuff we were talking about. There's some really neat, powerful presets that you can do. So standard, it would just be positioned over here, but we can have that container just fill all the space it contains and then tell it to, for all the items inside here, just put space between. So that's how we're getting this look here. We didn't have to mess with margin or padding or putting stuff in a specific spot. We just kind of place our items, and we can play just with that and get a lot of looks there. You might want to center your content, start, end. Space around is where you'll see there's a gap here and there's gaps to the side. There's space between for right now. So starting with the bar, again, this is kind of the base for everything you will do. You can kind of set up the base font size for this collection of elements. And if you're really careful with how you set things up, using ims and relative units, you can have a perfectly responsive bar that you can tweak, the font setting on and get everything resizing perfectly as you experiment with sizing and design and all that. We have this initial and this absolute positioning. Or I'm sorry, this initial position, we have relative and absolute positioning. Relative kind of has to do with, it's essentially a static bar that you'll see stuff kind of sit one on top of the other. So for example, if we added another bar, put that underneath the top one. And let's make this, I'm going to make this 100 VH. So that's 100, basically viewport units, 100% height of the viewport. And I'm going to make this, let's see here, just gray so you can see this effect for a second. If we have a relative bar, these are just sitting on top of each other. So if I scroll, you'll see that basically that height of this bar is what this gap is down here. If I were to make this first bar absolute, now when I scroll, oops, gotta click that. Now when I scroll, you'll see that right away we're seeing that white gap because this bar is actually now overhanging the gray area. And you can see that if I make this transparent. So let me actually make this relative. So now it's white again because you're seeing the background of the site shine through and it's just stacked. If I make it absolute, it's now overhanging. And so there's a lot of cool implications with this. You can play around with, background images showing through. We do that on our hero example. You can play around with box shadows here. You can give it a little spacing and get kind of an overhanging look. Lots of really fun things you can play around with there and do. But for now, we're just kind of breezing through, so not going to spend too much time on it. Content scrolling is, we'll have to get into this in a little more detail later, but essentially turning this on will allow, if it's a horizontal bar or a vertical bar, for you to scroll that content. So a bar like this, you could scroll left to right. You're seeing this a lot for mobile designs on sites like Google and Medium, where maybe you have big menus that you don't necessarily want to go down to a toggle or an off canvas. You can just allow your content to scroll horizontally. Same with the sidebars. You are now able to turn that on and have your content scroll up and down and fit a lot in that way. We have sticky bars. There is a ton of configuration here that you can play around with. Again, we will get into more detail on that later. We've got backgrounds. I'll actually play around with this on this bar here. We have an advanced background feature that you can use on your bars and containers. And essentially it's made up of two layers. So we actually have a color sitting on the background of this div. But if we wanted to, and actually let me make this guy overhang a little bit more again. So if you want, you now have the ability to layer images, video, different things with color. So for example, a common thing you might want to do is turn on this image layer. And we'll see, I don't know if I have a big, you know what, I'm just gonna grab, literally just going to grab my desktop photo. It's probably humongous. It's going to take forever. There we go. All right, so we've got a big hero image sitting behind our bar there now. And then, but you can notice that maybe if you had text sitting on there, there's too much contrast to where maybe the colors for your text, depending on how big or small they are, might not stand out right. Well, we can add an upper layer to our background now. So this is a layer of color sitting on top of our image. And that could be, let's say we want it to be black, but have a little bit of transparency shine through. Yeah, and then I'll come back up here. All right, so, you can see here we've got our bar, make it a little more pronounced, right? Hanging over our hero image area. Let me just save this, pop to the front so we can see it a little better. So that was very quick, and that's something that typically, you might have to do in Photoshop before, getting the contrast just right, playing around with things. With this, you can really just experiment with ideas right in the browser. It's kind of like you're skipping that whole step. You're kind of building right in the browser, and it's really fun to play around with and quickly explore different ideas. So you can use that feature, that background feature, on bars and containers. Let me just turn that off for a second. Click back up here. Of course, with your bars, you can set all the dimensions. So the height, the outer spacing. So this is, you'll see there's a little gap here between the side and this logo and this button. That is what that is. So if you don't have a max width on here, perhaps you want everything to always be full width, but always have a little bit of spacing. You can set that here. And this is kind of important because if you turn content scrolling on, we're kind of doing some really cool tricks here, but you've got these dimensions will always be maintained. Using normal padding and horizontal scrolling or vertical scrolling, a lot of times we'll lose one of these side paddings. It just kind of looks unfinished. This will always be maintained if you do turn that on and have something where you're scrolling through your content. Then you can set your content length. And this is all kind of done, it's called length, not width or height, because if you have a sidebar, it's the length vertically of your bar. So that's why we use the kind of abstract length. Same with max length. So let's say you wanted 1,000 pixels to be the max. So you can see from here to here is about 1,000 pixels. Get rid of that. And then this is for the absolute positioning. And now this is where things get really cool. For the most part, with your containers, your bars, you'll probably be keeping a row layout, but we have everything in our bars for these new builders is Flexbox powered. And Flexbox, if you're not familiar with it, is something you are really going to want to brush up on a little bit if you're using X Pro. But the cool thing is, as kind of Flexbox by itself is a little, it's kind of funky, the syntax and keeping track of, okay, if I have a column layout or a row layout, kind of what are things doing? What we've done really nicely is abstracted away all of those concerns. So you can just think, oh yeah, I kind of want a row or column layout. I maybe want to reverse it. Now you won't see anything reversed for this, but I'll explain that in a second. Got wrapping. And then this is where it gets kind of funky. With Flexbox, you're kind of thinking in terms of which axis you're working off of. So a horizontal or a vertical one. And these values kind of change depending on which one you're working on. So if you go to column, you'll see that these values swapped here. And we kind of do that for you behind the scenes because we don't want you to have to think about what you're working on. We just want you to kind of, think, oh yeah, I want a row and I want, this particular layout, and just be able to jump right to it. I'll show you a little bit more of that with the containers here in a second. And then there's just tons and tons of standard styling options. So for bars, you can play around with, borders. If you wanted to add something here, you could. Just get rid of that. And then we've got, you can play around with box shadows. You can play around with sizing. I mean, really, it's totally up to you and the vision you kind of have for something and what you want to accomplish. So that's kind of bars and the basis of those elements. Then we have containers, which house our elements. So in here, this container is what's holding these two items. So this is where you'll start to see, if you wanted a column layout, you could stack things. But Flexbox has a lot of cool properties to it, like being able to quickly reverse a layout. So imagine if you had a bunch of stuff in here and you were like, I'd like to see that the other way. You can do that. And then you already saw kind of the way that you can quickly position things and move them around the space. So you can see now these are positioned at the top, the center. Lots of cool stuff. Containers can also be styled like bars. So again, like I said, you might be wanting a certain color on a container that you want to play around with. You can have box shadows. You can add little sections to your bars. I mean, really, there's just a lot to be played around with there. So I wanted to kind of jump through that somewhat quickly so we can get on to walking through a few elements here and explaining to you guys how a few of these pieces work. So here's as for right now, this is the element screen that we have contained within X Pro. We've got buttons, content areas, images, navigation styles, different types of searching, social, text, widgets, carts, and more to come. One of the big things we really wanted to do is, we knew we were going to be giving a lot of power over to everyone. So we also wanted to make it, as much as we could, find these patterns, these reusable patterns that you all can jump into, play with, and then even jumping between like a button and a navigation, be familiar with styling, a link or how it works. And so that concept we kind of came up with, we're calling partials. And so a partial could be like a button. Like if you go kind of one step further, a button is typically, a link we want us to take somewhere. But we're also using links for navigation items. We might also be using something that looks like a button or maybe physically is linking out somewhere for like a toggle that turns something on or off. So we actually have a partial called an anchor partial that is used in, I would say, 75% of these modules. So once you get used to that, you'll start seeing it everywhere. And how it works is, so when I add this button here, you'll see all this design, text, graphic interactions. If I were to jump back out here and add a content area dropdown and inspect that, you'll see that this toggle here, this thing that physically looks kind of like a button, has those exact same options as this button over here. And that's because they're using that same partial, but the way you can style these partials and what you can achieve with them is virtually limitless. And you'll kind of see that here in a second. So what's really cool, like I said, once you get kind of familiar with like, oh, okay, that's the anchor partial or the links, whatever you think of them as, you'll start seeing those patterns pop up between modules. So there's a lot of stuff to take in, but there's a lot of commonality between them, which makes them really approachable and fun to work with. So for now, we will just start on the button here. And I'm going to spend probably the most on this and then run through some other modules in a second. But just to give you a sense of kind of the power you have kind of at your fingertips. So we can, of course, set our font size. We can play around with that. We can set dimensions, minimum dimensions, and max. And then there's a lot of stuff, too, built into the system that normally wouldn't work without a little bit of work, so to speak. For example, if you wanted a, let's do it on this toggle. It might make a little more sense. If you wanted a full height toggle, and you just, in your brain, you might think of that as, okay, I want that to be 100%. Just entering in, you'll see, now the styling's a lot. I got to mess with the border radius really fast. And let's just take that. I'll leave the box shadow so you can see it for now. I'll take it off. Can't make up my mind today. And then we'll add a little background just so you can see that. Okay, so I've got my full height toggle. If you know kind of a little bit of some of the nuances of CSS, something like this shouldn't work out of the box. You can't just say be 100% tall and work, because you kind of have to, every parent element up the chain needs to have a height specified or have some sort of height. all that to say, there's been a lot of work in thinking this through to allow you guys to, as much as possible, just if you can kind of think it up, for the most part, you can kind of get there without having to worry too much of the nuances of, CSS and laying stuff out and how do I really achieve that look. And there's kind of different ways to do it too. Since this is Flexbox powered, you could on your container say, okay, well, I want my items to be stretched. And instead of saying 100% height, everything will kind of get stretched out. So there's different ways to play around with it and achieve certain looks. We'll jump back over here. So there's your dimensions. We've got background colors you can play with. We'll just let's find kind of a funky color. I think that'll do. And then let's just, so we get it kind of looking good. Do that. You can specify your link, different link types here. This content flex layout. So this has to do with the different types of content that you might be adding in to your button. So for example, if you turn a graphic on, and let's say you want it to be an icon, we'll make it white to match. And let's just for fun turn on the secondary icon. And let's give it a little flip. There we go. So this is laying out the content of your button. So for example, if you like this icon and text are here, but maybe you want the icon flipped, you can just hit reverse layout. You've got the icon over there. Or if you want to experiment with stacking stuff one on top of the other, flipping it around, you can play with that. And then you can position your items in your button as you need, again, with those same Flexbox options. Center is probably what you'll want to do most of the time with the button. But we have found tons of different looks just by playing around with this in the browser. And it's very cool to kind of see come to life. So this is laying out the content. And again, this same element is kind of being used for menus as well. So you might have a sub indicator, like a little caret or a little dot indicating there's a drop-down maybe for a menu. Same thing. You can specify how you want those links laid out, the ordering, all that sort of stuff. If you do need to play around with bumping your elements around a little bit, you have full control of margin, full control of padding here. So this would be, just save that, but if we wanted it to be a little fatter on top and bottom, we could do that. Just make that a little bigger there. Borders, so same thing as before. Again, you're kind of getting a sense probably of just how much control is available here. We'll kind of do one of these. Border radius if you want a pill, if you want a square, if you want a slight rounded square, it's all available there. And then there's some really cool stuff if you play around with, if you've done a little bit of playing around with CSS before, you can get some really neat looks by just maybe, keeping one side different. Got a little teardrop look there. Lots of cool stuff to play around with. We've used this a lot before too for, let's say, let me get rid of this border here. And let me make this guy 0. Really fast, let me duplicate this button. Put this button over here. And actually, here's a little trick. We're going to push everything away from us. Oh, wait, I got to get my container. It's this guy. There we go. Let's say for here, I wanted to make sort of a dual button kind of call out thing. So maybe I'd flip this. And then you've got kind of a 2-button call out. You could play with colors. Really just as you play with positioning, start putting stuff in different places. I mean, the options you'll just start to kind of realize are very limitless. Let me add that back there. Let's just get that back to normal. Box shadows, so kind of like before, we can play with all this styling. Your text setup, so here is where you will work on your content. So we have 2 lines of text you can work with in a button, or you can turn it off completely if you just want something with an icon. So you turn that on, and then you can maybe say about our team. Again, you can play around with reversing layouts. So maybe you want that text above or below. We want it below right now since it makes a little more sense there. And then you have full styling control over each line of text. So that second line, maybe you want it to be, spaced out a little bit, maybe really tiny, maybe too tiny. You can play with the spacing between the text here. There's a lot that you can start doing with colors, with layout, all sorts of things in that text option there. This margin here is kind of the margin around all of your text. So that's kind of what's giving you the spacing between the graphic and the text here. This graphic has a little bit of margin behind it too. So if I do that, see it kind of jump in. And then for text, anywhere you have text, you will, for the most part, see these controls available, where you can set your font family. You can specify a weight you want to work with. You can specify the size. You can do letter spacing. Set the line height, normal italic. This won't do anything because of the way it's set up right now, but you can justify or align your content the way you need, style it, transform it, play with colors, play with text shadows. It's all there at your fingertips to start playing around with, which is really cool. And then these, you won't see much of this in this video, but the way this is set up is, so we have a kind of font palette system we've built out that allows you to specify. Let's all back up one second. A big pain point we've seen in a lot of builders is if you're building a big page, everywhere you have text or something with text that you're specifying or styling, you'll find yourself, assigning, Lotto or whatever font you're using for your design. Well, let's say you have even a decently sized page. That might be 50, 60, 70 spots of text, between buttons and content that you're styling. If you ever wanted to go back and see what your design looked like with something different, either just a weight or a font family, it's a real pain to have to go to each individual item and reassign it. So a step behind this is we have a system under our templating system where you can specify, you can make custom groups of fonts. So for example, you might make a font group for your body copy that you want to use everywhere. And that body copy basically might say, I'm using Lotto and I want it to have, a 300 weight, a 400 weight, and a 700 weight available. So every time you assign your body copy, you would see this change to those available weights, and you can play around with that. So what's really cool is if you go back and then say, okay, instead of Lotto, I want to use Merriweather today. You change it once in the templates here. I can't click off or I'll lose my spot. You change it once in the templates, and it will filter everywhere out through your design to be updated. And this stuff will gracefully fall back. So like if you had a 300 weight assigned, but Merriweather only has a 400 weight, it will fall to 400 and just kind of give you the first available look that's available. So really cool stuff there. Same with colors. We have a palette generator that you would see here if I had some colors assigned. And again, these will be in the more detailed videos, so that's why I'm not diving into them right now. But you can set up palettes of colors for your design. So let's say, I mean, how many times have you worked on a project where, you know, you're always referring back to like a sticky note or something you put on your computer that says, you know, here's my 5 hex codes I'm using for colors throughout the site. Well, what's really cool is you could assign those once in our color palette thing. They will show up here in the picker, and you literally can just click into the picker and assign your color. And similar with the fonts, you might go back and say, oh, that kind of main branding color that was blue, maybe I want it to be red now. You change it in one spot, and it will change everywhere on your site. So that is a really, really powerful tool that, you know, was born out of our frustration of using builders and stuff we wanted to see. So we built it. And I think you guys will find that once you use it, you'll have a really hard time going back and using anything else. So you've kind of seen the graphic here. You can use images. This graphic type is also different. If it is a toggle, you will get a third graphic type, which is this burger, which allows you to specify different toggle types. So for example, and you have full control over everything here. So you can change the size of your little burger. You can change the spacing. You know, that's too tiny. We can't see it now. Basically, what you just want to keep in mind here is this is all in your hands. Colors. And then we also have cool little grids. And again, all of this. Oop, lost my spot there. All of this here, same thing. You can play around with sizing. We have a kind of what we're calling the more, kind of an ellipses. You can play with sizing and spacing, colors, and these all are with the toggle element. So you can play with all those. And they're very granular. They're very slim little things that we reuse everywhere. So you're not, you know, just getting all this bloat sitting one on top of the other. Let's see here. So we've kind of done the graphic. We'll jump to the interactions here. This is where it gets real fun. So with the text, there's tons of stuff you can play with on hover. So for example, if when you slide over it, you wanted to see your text zip in from the right there, got these CSS animations, or maybe you want to see it flip to match your icon. All sorts of different things. And they're kind of staggered. So if you added back in the about, I can't type today, 1 second, about our team. If you did the text, let's do slide right again, you'll see the primary text up top come in, and then the secondary comes kind of right behind it. It's all these really fun little effects that add just a little bit of whimsy to play around with. I'll actually turn these off for now because I want to spend a little bit of time on these particles. I know a lot of people have been asking about the particle. So the particle is this very abstract little concept that we came up with because we knew we wanted to give you guys an ability to achieve all sorts of different looks. And actually I'm going to, real fast, just going to make this button a little more generic so I can show you, so you can see these effects a little more prominently. Need our text to be black. Just 1 second here. And our graphic was the final guy. Again, this is probably styled a little better, but we are just playing with it right now. Oh, and let me make it 100% height. There we go. Perfect. So we knew we had a lot of different styles we wanted you guys to be able to achieve. for different like hover effects and things that are just, engaging to play around with and look at when people are designing things. But we didn't want to just give you a laundry list of effects because number one, that puts a lot of just kind of static bloat in the theme that, you might pick one style, but if we have 50 styles we've made for you, well, now all these 50 styles that you're not using or 49 styles you're not using are just kind of sitting around adding more weight to your website. So you can think of the particles as these abstract little designy pieces that are meant for you to design interaction effects. And they are essentially centered around, you position them, so they're relative to your link. So you see my link, I've got this whole box here to play with. So you position them somewhere in the link, basically top right, bottom, a corner, dead center. The placement inside or overlapping means, for example, if your little particle was a square about as big as this hand, inside would mean the hand is aligned right here at the edge. Overlapping means it's kind of overlapping the edge here, and it does have a very different effect of what you can achieve. I'll show you here in a second. You can choose a way that it scales in, either both axes, individual ones, or none, so it just kind of fades. You can set delays, and then you set the kind of direction the transform comes from, height, width, color. So let me just show you what this might look like. So I'm going to position this one at the top on the inside. It's going to scale X because I want it to be 100% width and we'll make it 4 pixels tall. And we'll just say the transform, this won't really do anything here, but starts from the top. And let's make it a really bright red so we can see it. I'm going to save this for my other one in a second. Now when I hover over this, all right, so you see that line appearing up there? And let me turn off this so we can focus on that line more. So again, I've got my 100% width, 4 pixel tall red line that's at the top of my link on the inside, and it's scaling X. Now if I scaled Y, this kind of shows you get lots of different effects here. Now the blue outline for our little observer here is kind of blocking it, but you can see that it's scaling in from the top rather than the middle there. I just realized I need to turn this off too. And then if you did scale all, I'll make this a little bigger. You'll see it kind of, it's scaling wide like an X, but it's also coming in from the top center. And that's where this transform starts from, changes things. So that's the top center basically. If I said top left, all right, so you see that coming in from the side there. It's subtle, but it does make a difference. And then let's say I added a second one, and I'm going to do the exact same thing, but I'm going to start from the opposite side. So bottom right, 8 pixels. Let's make it red. All right, so you see these two coming from the opposite corners there. Pretty cool stuff. We'll just change these back to X. Make them 4, so they're a little more. So now this is just an X animation coming in from both sides. And then what's really kind of cool is you can start playing with delays a little bit. So just to show you, I could add a little delay here, so a 0.15 second delay. So you'll see the top one come in and then the bottom one right after it. And I can actually match them so it'll be whoop, whoop, like that. And you might actually want to put them from the same side. We'll make this double height and make the transparency 50. All right, so you guys see that? Got our delay of that second one coming in there. So this is just playing around with ideas with lines. There's all sorts of stuff you can do. Let's say, let's start this one on the left. Start this one on the right. And we'll say the transform I'm going to do is going to start from the center We'll scale everything. We'll keep these on the inside for now. And what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to make these 8 pixels tall and wide. So basically a square. And then I'm just going to make it a circle basically. So the border radius here, we'll make it a circle. All right, and so now we've got these kind of little, let me save and go over here so you can see it a little better. So now again, and that might be a style you're playing around with, but if we made 100 of these, I mean, that would just be, it'd be limiting because you wouldn't be able to really tweak the sizing, the colors, the animations, the timing. And with this, you truly can do whatever you want. Now this is where it gets really cool too. We have a little box here for some inline CSS. And if you get, oops, I'm typing too fast. If you get just a little bit creative, kind of thinking through some of this, and if you're comfortable with CSS enough, you might be able to do, you can do some things like this. So I'm going to say 8 pixels, 0, 0. I apologize, I keep hitting some buttons. Let me just make sure. All right, so what's happening here, I'm actually going to adjust this slightly. Save it, go to the front end. So what's happening here is, oh, that's interesting. I forgot to, actually I do need to make it 8 so it fully comes over. So what happens when you have all the power, you got to play around with it a little bit. So what's happening here is our little particle is transparent, but we're adding an inline box shadow that allows us to kind of animate stuff in different directions. So you're not just relegated to kind of the dimension where it sits. It can start from a side and kind of move in. Let's say we made these 2 pixels wide, but 8 pixels tall. Now they're going to be little lines. Animated, and it's too tiny. Need something a little bigger. Okay. And again, I can play around with, I could do full height stuff too. I can play with percentages of my button. And again, I'm just playing with these literally in the moment right here. There's nothing in particular I'm trying to demonstrate. I've come up with countless of these really cool little designs that you can really play around with from using these. So hopefully that kind of walks through the particle a little bit more and allows you guys to get some ideas for how that works and is used. Oh, and let me show you the placement to the side. Let me put this back to the top, scale all. So we're going to overlap it and we'll do 20 pixels, 20 pixels, 20 pixels. I keep hitting buttons, guys. My apologies. Get rid of that. Okay, so if I had this placed on the inside, I basically just made a 20 pixel circle that is scaling in from the top and is giving me that look. But maybe that doesn't look exactly the way we want our design to appear. So we have this overlap feature, which again basically splits it in half. And so your circle is now overlapping this area. So you can get little effects like this. And there is, again, just countless things we've discovered playing around with it. It has been so much fun just figuring out, how to do some of these things. Let's add a second one here for fun. Top, scale all, overlap, 20 pixels. Make that. Oh, actually, I want to make this a little bigger because we're going to delay it. I don't know if you guys can see that really subtle little second one come in. I'm hopping over to the live site because this observer kind of gets in the way a little bit sometimes, depending on how you're doing it. All right, so you see that? So again, just let your imagination run wild with the things you can do, playing with, box shadows. You could add a physical box shadow to these items and get a really cool look. There's just, the possibilities are endless. So anyway, I spent a long time on that. If you guys are still with me, awesome. And if you've played around with our presets here at the beginning, we have a few right now that you can assign that will give you kind of a look right out of the box. So that's kind of our integrity button. Here's kind of the renew button, icon. These little green lines, those are particles. And then for the renew button, that background kind of sliding in, that's a particle. And then we have ethos. So for right now, we just have these 4 main styles. And eventually you guys will be able to make your own presets. So you can save all these settings that you've made for like a button that you want to reuse over and over and over again throughout your site and assign it anywhere you need. So that will be coming very soon, and we're excited about that. Let me just get back to something that kind of fits here. Oh man, there's just so much more to keep talking about. You've basically got, I'll need to wrap this up because I know this was meant to be a shorter video, but there's a lot to go into. We've got these content areas. So a content area, this quite literally is just a blank space for you to put anything you want directly in the bar. It could be text, it could be some funky, like an SVG that maybe you want like physical SVG markup, not an image SVG. So that's really cool. You can play with that. But then we also have these areas here too. So dropdowns, modals, and off-canvas areas are also partials. So we've talked about links, right? And you'll see these used in navigation and toggles. These three things are partials as well. So you'll see like these navigations are using them, or the modal is using this, or you've got a cart modal. So once you get kind of familiar with these pieces, you'll be able to play with them and be more comfortable using them in different spots. So we'll add a drop down. This is the exact same as the, I'll add the renew one. Those are particles. You see there's kind of a subtle delayed animation there. This is basically a content area where you can add anything you want into a drop-down. So if you want a special opt-in form or something like that, you can place that there. We've got content area. I'm just going to open this, a modal. So a lot of time and care has gone into crafting these things to be, how shall I say this? Responsibly responsive. There's so many things out there I see where, people almost get stuff to where it works across different devices. And modals are a big one that just never seem to be done quite right. So even at smaller screens, your modal is fully responsive. Even if I make this really tiny, you'll always be able to scroll to your content when you're working on it. And I've got a dev build going on right here, so that's why that's not moving right now. But you can absolutely always scroll within this area to your content, and that X is always available for you to close things out from, the tiniest of screens to the biggest of screens. So that's a really powerful and important feature. Same thing with our little off-canvas areas. So this is a cool element that is used for different navigations and carts. But we also have just an area where if you just want a total blank canvas to work on in an off-canvas fashion, you have that. And with these, you have options you can change the positioning where they appear. You can change the max size. We can play with colors. Anything you want. The background overlay, how intense or light you want that, or maybe a color. So it's really completely in your hands, whatever you want to do with these things. Styling there. And again, completely responsive. So if I were to make this 40 ins wide, you'll notice that as I shrink down, this is still moving with me. I never lose my little X here. This content is fully scrollable. So if we had content that could scroll, you'll always see that X available to close out and get back to your main content there. Close that. Let me actually get rid of the button here. All sorts of different navigation types. We have inline navigation, which just by default is kind of your standard, links up here in the menu and then drop downs. But what's really cool is that you have, again, full control over the top links. These are using that anchor partial, so the same thing as your buttons, and your sublinks. So I will just assign some presets here now. Now that we've talked in depth about some of those features, hopefully the looks that you're seeing here will make a little more sense. So right here we've got, these are actually two graphics that are changing out. Notice how the square turns into a checkbox there. And same thing here, we've got a little file icon that as we hover is swapping out. And you can see, again, I've got totally different colors. I've changed the dimensions. I've got a specific look. If we change this to, renew is kind of built on a dark bar, so that won't look good on the white. But if we change to icon, again, we have a totally different look here. All created with the same feature set. And then what's really cool is when you start playing with different layouts. I'll show you that content scrolling we were talking about. So very quickly, if let's say you wanted to make a bar that was below some content and you knew you wanted your links to kind of always be full width and scale to fit that area, you would essentially need to just do fill space equally. Now again, I can't begin to describe, even just a few short years ago, doing something like this would have required, very carefully kind of measuring out the dimensions or using percentages. And if you added a new link, you'd have to change the percentages which stuff was spaced out at. It's just, the stuff you can do with Flexbox is very cool. Let me actually go up to the bar here, get rid of that outer spacing. So now I have these links that you can see are equally spaced, taking up their spot, totally responsive. And then let's say on the bar, if I wanted to do content scrolling, got to set that to auto. All right, guys, sorry about that. I had to step away for a moment. So I don't entirely remember where we were at, but I think we were talking about navigation here and how we can set this up in kind of a unique content scrolling way. So I'm actually going to get these top links and I'm going to give them a minimum width of 200 pixels. So what that should do is say, hey, these should be, at 200 pixels. They will not shrink anymore. And then if you have content scrolling turned on, you can see how you can scroll through that content and get that. And actually, you'll see this a little better if I make the bar here. Get my screen back to size here. If I make my bar relative again, there we go. Probably make a little more sense. But so yeah, imagine you have this bar as kind of either your main nav or secondary nav below your content. And instead of, having to hide it at a certain breakpoint and show another navigation, if you have a lot of items that maybe just kind of works this way, you can have them set up in a way so that at a certain point they just maintain their width, and if people want to get to it, they can scroll through. And again, it typically works a little better with more navigation links, maybe where you can see them a little closer together. But that's one technique. And you can use this for all sorts of stuff. So there are so many things to play around with here. Different looks to achieve, different things to try out. Similarly, if we were to add a left bar, check this out real fast. So I will make my container here fill all the space in that bar. I'm going to click on the bar. I'm going to get rid of the spacing there. And again, remember this length, we want to probably set to auto. I'm just going to turn that on. I'm going to add an inline navigation here. I'll apply that integrity preset. Now, for this menu, once it loads up here, so for this menu, 1 second here. Again, I've got my dev build that doesn't always want to work with me here. We can do the exact same thing. So we can set up, and then we could change that particle to where it was coming from the side, but you can see here that we now have these links are each behaving in a way that they're taking up equal space vertically. So a very cool little trick. And then they will stop at a certain point and you could scroll in that area as well. So there's lots of, and again, I'm not styling these or really even digging into the aesthetics of anything just yet. We're just playing around with like kind of some ideas, and this will be delved into in a lot more detail in other videos as we discussed. Let me get rid of that guy. So we have a drop-down navigation, and just to space it out a little more, let me assign, the integrity preset. So we've got, and I've got to turn my content scrolling off, because if that's on, then our content is not overflowable. We can't go beyond it. So you can see with the drop down here, it's basically just that drop down styling. So we have a navigation that is centered around being a drop down, and this works great, obviously, as a mobile navigation, especially if you only have one set of menus here. And we'll come back here, get rid of that. Did navigation inline. So nav collapse is interesting because in a top bar, it will come out in a collapsible area. So the whole idea with the collapse navigation, or I'm sorry, an off-canvas area. The whole idea with the collapse navigation is that you have a set of links and you can expand them like so. And this one is set up to, again, all the presets are set to work in the top bar, but they will work in the sidebar. They might need some slight adjustments. So if we added a left collapse navigation here, clicking around for it. And actually, I'll just leave this setting so you can kind of see it. But it does the exact same thing, just without the off canvas, because we're already in an area that we can get to click around through. And again, my dev build, few things a little off here, but so we can click around in this, but then in the top bar, if we add it, you see that it comes in from the off canvas area here. Get rid of that bar, get rid of that guy. And then we have our nav modal, which for now only supports a top level menu, but eventually we'll have the ability to show off sub menus as well. So this is great for a really dramatic full screen look. And again, these links are fully stylable. The positioning of the text, these are actually two particles here. So I've got this one kind of animating all the way in from the side, and then I have this one to the left here that's scaling on the y-axis across that left side. And all that can be tweaked and played around with. And then if you get really creative with your CSS, these can be fully responsive all the way down. They don't have to stay that huge size all the way down to a very small screen size. Let's get rid of that guy. And then, of course, we have images. They can be standard images that you might want to add, and they are fully stylable: colors, backgrounds, borders, shadows. Or you can have the choice to include a scaling image, which works great for sticky navs. So let's say you have a logo to the side that you want to see scale down as the bar itself scales down. That's what a scaling image is great for. We have our inline search, which is fully stylable. We can click in that. Just apply the integrity preset. So this is a cool one that totally, you'll see it's flat. We've got kind of a gray outline. We've got our submit here. As we click into it, the box shadow appears. It gives it kind of a 3D look. And as we start typing, our clear button will appear here. And we can use that to clear it. We can click away. That maintains as long as there's text in here. And we can still clear that just like a normal search. And what's really neat about this one is, again, everything is completely stylable. You have the option to order things differently. So for example, if you wanted your input, the physical input right here, to be first, we can place that first, put the submit last and the clear in the middle. And you could style the positioning to get them right. So for example, the icon preset uses that, where our search is to the side and then we are repositioning the items here. And again, you have full control over the input, over each button, over how you want the interaction styles for the search to be. Very cool stuff. And of course we have that, but available in a modal. So we can assign, let's just do integrity. So notice I've got my button here, our little toggle. We can click on. Totally different look and completely responsive using some creative. I've mentioned that a couple times. The trick there that we're using on that guy is, where am I using? I'm using it on the modal. So this is a really neat trick if you guys haven't seen this before, but these viewport width units are really neat because it will automatically scale your content based on the width of the viewport. And it's great for big full screen stuff like that, like the modal nav you saw earlier and like this search. But viewport units can be very drastic from a really big screen down to a small screen. So this is kind of a cool trick if you use the calc CSS function, which if you guys haven't used before, it's a very cool function which allows you to mix units basically. So my search's font size is 12 pixels plus 1.5 viewport width units. And that's what allows it to, as I scale, as the viewport gets smaller, the search will get smaller. And then I set up everything else. So that's kind of the one thing that's a little more advanced maybe in CSS if you haven't used it before. But then everything else inside is set up with ims. So since everything's set up with ims, it can all scale down proportionately and give me a really great look at all screen sizes. Get rid of our search. We have social, which is essentially a collection of more buttons, but they're geared towards social usage. So they're typically just icons, but they can be fully customized. Again, we might add the integrity one. So a little smaller, but again, we could certainly turn on our text and get a whole different look there, like us on Facebook. We could go back to the beginning and lots of different, it's probably one, there we go. Yeah, that will show up. This one, I showed this earlier with the toggle, but this renew particle animation is really cool. So what's happening here is we have a graphic that's flipping, and as it's flipping, the main blue particle is coming in behind it, and then there's a delay for this particle that's in the middle that's a little bit of a lighter blue. It's a really cool effect. Each bar has presets too, so you can set up the bar. Let's do that actually to see how the item should look like inside there. So yeah, pretty cool little effect. I'll actually go back to integrity on the bar. Then we have text and headline. These are very similar. The only main difference is text is intended to be used for, I guess multi-line isn't exactly the right word, but like multi-element even. So for example, if you had a big block of text and you needed multiple paragraphs, which it even says right here. So maybe multiple paragraphs, or maybe you want to use the rich text editor and have something that is, paragraphs with lists and stuff like that. You can style all that in here, and it will style all the content within it. And again, you have full control over how it should look. So the headline element is just like that, but it's meant for one line of text. You can specify the element that wraps it. So this is, I personally like using this for the most part because I can kind of be very specific with what I want out of it. And it also has a text overflow trick. So if you needed your text to overflow as a bar gets smaller, and we have some cool demos we're going to show usages for that later on, you have that up your sleeve as well for the headline control. And then we have widget areas, so you can create full footer or header widget areas that you want. And then we have our carts. So we have a cart drop-down element. Let those presets load. Do integrity. And you can see here, oh, I think I have my bar. Oh, you know what it is? I think, yeah, my Z index is off when I change there we go. When I change the preset. A lot of things to keep track of, but it's fun to play with and lots of power. So we have our cart here. So this is the WooCommerce cart, and we have basically just given you full control over what you want to do with it. You have full styling over the title, over the elements, and then what's really neat is you can, similar to the search, you can say, okay, well, I would like, maybe you don't want any title, so you can just get rid of it, or we can add it back. But then you have the ability to change the order, so maybe you want your total first, and maybe you actually want your items last, but you want your buttons to be in the middle there. So you can change the order, and then you can change the, there would need to be a little styling to space these things out right. But you could absolutely come in here and tweak the order of how all this works. You can tweak image sizes. When you have full text control over the title, tweak image sizes. You can do colors for these items, borders. Let me just run through a few different carts because these are wildly different. So there's renew. Let me go up to the front so you can see it. So again, totally different style, different look for our buttons here. Here is icon. So very minimal toggle here that we are showing off. We've got our buttons, we've got these items here. And notice too, again, very subtle, but we've moved our total to the top. We've put our items in the middle and our actions are still at the bottom. So that's taking advantage of that ordering. And then for something a little more dramatic, we've got the ethos setting here, which again, there's a bar setting to match this, but so we've got full control over how we want these items to appear in there. You can, again, with anything with a drop-down or a modal, you can physically style that element and play with that. And now that we've run through those, let's just show off. We've got the cart modal. Let's do the integrity one since we've been kind of sticking with that guy for now. So again, there's the same cart, just in a different context, and it really adds a different kind of flair depending on whatever your end goal is and how you want to use it. And actually, let me just I'll add the drop down modal and then the off canvas. And we will apply these presets just so you can see how the same element in different contexts, once this loads up here, can really lend a totally different feel. And again, all that is responsive. So very cool stuff. So anyway, that was a slightly longer than intended run through of everything, but we wanted to give you guys just a little bit of a preview of kind of the elements, how some things work, walking you through different features. We still have the completely built-in CSS and JavaScript editors, and there's a lot more to play with that we are so excited to show you guys as things continue on. So thank you very much for taking a little time to hang out with me today while we run through these features. And we are very excited, as I said, to bring you some more videos here in the near-term future. Thanks, guys. Bye.